My sister has always been the kind of person who needs an audience. Even passing the salt at dinner, she does it like she's accepting an award. So when Mom announced she was throwing Dad a 60th birthday dinner, just family, she said, nothing fancy. I already knew what that meant. It meant my sister Cordelia would find a way to make it about herself. She always did. I flew in from Seattle on a Friday afternoon. Dad lives in Tucson, the house I grew up in. Tan stucco and a bougainvillea that's been threatening to eat the front porch since I was in middle school. Mom had made enchiladas. Uncle Bart was already parked in the recliner with a Modelo. Everything felt exactly like it always did. Warm and a little loud and slightly chaotic in the way only a family gathering can be. Cordelia arrived 40 minutes late, which was also exactly like always. She pulled up in a rented Audi. She lives in Boston, she always rents something conspicuous when she comes home, and walked in wearing a blazer on a Saturday like she comes straight from a deposition. Which, knowing her, she might have. She's a corporate attorney at a firm with 4 names in the title. She has been, very loudly, for the past 6 years. I hugged Dad, helped Mom carry out the rice, and sat down at the far end of the table where I usually sit. Near Uncle Bart, away from the performance. The thing about Cordelia is that she's not cruel exactly. She's just incapable of believing anyone else in the room might matter as much as she does. She loves us. I genuinely believe that. But her love comes packaged with this constant low-grade condescension that she doesn't even notice she's doing. Dinner started fine. Dad talked about his plans to finally redo the backyard. Mom asked Cordelia about a case she couldn't discuss. Uncle Bart told the same story about a road trip to Albuquerque that he's told every family gathering since 2011, and everyone laughed anyway because he tells it well and we love him. Then my cousin asked me how work was going. He's 22, just graduated, figuring out what he wants to do. He asked the question genuinely, the way young people do when they're still mapping the world and everyone else's life feels like a clue. I said work was good. Busy, but good. Cordelia looked up from her plate. What is it you do again? She said. Not unkindly. Just the way you ask about someone's hobby. I'm in finance. I said. Right. She nodded, already returning to her enchilada. That's right. She said it the way you'd say, oh, you garden, or oh, you do ceramics. Something pleasant and small and entirely forgettable. I didn't correct her. I never do. The truth is, I've been not correcting Cordelia my entire adult life. When I got my MBA, she was in law school, and everything was about the bar exam. When I took my first job at an investment firm in Chicago, she was making partner track, and everything was about billable hours. When I quietly, steadily built a career that I'm genuinely proud of, she was busy being proud of hers in a way that left no oxygen for anyone else's accomplishments. So I learned to breathe less, to take up less room, to answer finance and let people assume I meant teller or bookkeeper or something in an office with motivational posters and a Keurig machine. It was easier. And honestly, part of me liked knowing something she didn't. Part of me liked being underestimated. Dad knew, sort of. Mom knew I was doing well. But the details, the actual scope of it, I kept vague. I told myself it was humility. Maybe it was. Maybe it was also just easier than having to perform for Cordelia's skepticism. After dinner, we moved to the living room. Dad opened gifts. Mom brought out a cake from the bakery he likes, the one with the lemon frosting. Uncle Bart refilled his Modelo. Cordelia settled into the armchair near the fireplace with a glass of Malbec and started talking about a conference she'd attended in New York the previous month. Something about mergers and acquisitions law, regulatory changes, the increasing complexity of cross-border deals. She talks about her work the way some people talk about a religion, with total fluency and absolute confidence that everyone in the room is following along and impressed. My cousin was nodding politely. Mom was half listening while tidying up cake plates. Dad had the soft, patient expression he gets when Cordelia gets going. Fond and slightly far away. Then she said it. I don't think she meant it as an attack. Knowing Cordelia, it probably felt like an observation, but she set down her wine glass, glanced around the room and said, honestly, I don't know how people do it in fields without real intellectual rigor. Like, no offense, but finance, accounting, that kind of thing. It's just numbers. Anyone can learn to push numbers around. It takes a different kind of mind to do what lawyers do. We're building arguments. We're constructing logic under pressure. Silence. Not total silence. The TV was still on in the background. Some home renovation show dad records and never finishes. But the conversation went very, very quiet. My cousin looked at his shoes. Mom picked up another cake plate she didn't need. Dad made a small sound that wasn't quite a word. I picked up my coffee cup, and Uncle Bart, who had been very still in the recliner for the past 30 seconds, slowly lowered his medallo and looked at me over the top of his reading glasses. "Sweetheart," he said to Cordelia, in his unhurried way. He's a retired civil engineer who spent 25 years building bridges in the Southwest and speaks at exactly one speed no matter what's happening. "You know what your sister does, right? Like, specifically?" Cordelia looked at him. "Finance," she said. She said finance. Uncle Bart picked up his phone from the side table. He'd been reading something on it earlier. He scrolled for a moment, then held the screen out toward Cordelia. "Is this her?" Cordelia took the phone. I already knew what was on it. There had been a profile, a trade publication piece, the kind that gets passed around in certain circles. I'd done one interview reluctantly because my firm's communications team had pushed for it and I'd run out of ways to say no. It had a photo. My name. My title. I watched Cordelia's face. She read for a long moment, longer than I expected. Then she looked up at me. "You're a managing director," she said. "Yes. At Ashford Capital, yes." She blinked. That's a $15 billion fund. "Closer to 18 now," I said. "But yes." The room was extremely quiet. The renovation show had gone to commercial. I want to be clear about something, because it matters. I wasn't happy in the way I'd imagined I might be. All those years of saying fine, finance, numbers, and swallowing the rest. I wasn't vindicated. I wasn't triumphant. Mostly I just felt tired. And a little sad. And strangely exposed. The way you feel when a thing you've been carrying privately is suddenly in the middle of the room. Mom was staring at me. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" Didn't you ever say anything? I didn't know how to answer that. I still don't, fully. "You knew I was doing well?" I said. "I knew you had a good job," she said. I didn't know it was that." Dad was smiling. A quiet smile, the kind he gets. He reached over and squeezed my hand. Cordelia hadn't said anything else. She was still holding Uncle Bart's phone, though she'd stopped looking at it. She was looking at me with an expression I didn't quite recognize on her. Something that wasn't the usual Cordelia expression. Something that was almost small. "I didn't know," she said finally. "I know you didn't. I said that thing about finance being..." She stopped. "It's fine. It's not, actually." She put the phone down on the coffee table. That was a really condescending thing to say. I looked at her. "Yeah," I said, "it was." She absorbed that. Cordelia is not someone who absorbs criticism gracefully as a rule. But she sat with it for a moment, and the room sat with her. And eventually she said, "Okay. I deserved that." Uncle Bart reached over and retrieved his phone. "There's a good paragraph in there about her work on sustainable infrastructure investment," he said mildly. "You should read the whole thing." What happened after that was not a movie moment. Nobody cried, nobody gave a speech. Dad eventually asked if anyone wanted more cake, and Mom said yes, and Uncle Bart said obviously, and my cousin said he had a question about what a managing director actually does because he was trying to figure out his own career, and I spent the next 20 minutes actually talking to him about it in a way I hadn't let myself talk about work in years. Cordelia sat quietly for a while. Then she moved from the armchair to the couch, closer to the rest of us, and she listened. Later, when most of the family had drifted toward the kitchen or the back porch, she came and sat next to me. Not dramatically. Just quietly, the way people do when they have something real to say and they're not quite sure how to start. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yeah." "Did you stay quiet on purpose? Like, was it a thing you were doing intentionally?" I thought about it honestly. "A little of both," I said. "At first it was just easier. You were always so loud about your work, and it felt like there wasn't room. And then after a while I think I liked it, knowing something you didn't. She laughed a little, not her performing laugh, her real one, which is slightly too loud and sounds like it surprises her. That's fair, she said. That's actually very fair. I stopped, tried to find the right words. I think I was protecting myself from having to justify it to you. You have such a specific idea of what serious work looks like, and I didn't want to spend years proving to you that what I do is serious. She was quiet for a moment. Is that what I've been doing? Making you prove things? Not consciously, I said. But kind of, yeah. She looked at her hands. Cordelia never looks at her hands. She always looks at whoever she's talking to, direct and certain. I didn't realize, she said. I know. I'm sorry. I believed her. That's the thing about Cordelia. Her apologies, when they actually come, are real. She doesn't give them easily, but she means them. It's okay, I said. And I meant it too. The drive back to the hotel that night, I thought about the shape of the thing. How long I'd carried it. How unnecessary that had been, and also how understandable. How easy it is to shrink to fit a room, especially a room you grew up in. I had done something real. I built something from nothing. Started as an analyst straight out of business school. Worked 15-hour days in an industry that doesn't make space for you until you force it to. Made decisions that kept people's money safe through 2 recessions. Led a team I was proud of. And for years I'd summarized all of it as finance because it was easier than watching my sister decide whether it was impressive enough. I'm 31 years old. And I spent a significant portion of those years making myself smaller to fit a story that was never really true. What I know now, what I think I've always known but finally felt that night in my parents' living room, is that being quiet is not the same as being invisible. Silence is not always submission. Sometimes you're quiet because you're building something that doesn't need an audience yet. The work was real whether she knew about it or not. The fund was $18 billion whether she acknowledged it or not. My team showed up every morning whether my sister had the right picture of me or not. But I'll be honest, having Uncle Bart hold up that phone felt better than I expected. Not because I needed her to know, but because it turned out I'd been carrying the weight of her not knowing longer than I'd admitted to myself. A few weeks later, Cordelia texted me. She'd been thinking about what I said. About not having room to talk about my work. She wanted to have an actual conversation about what I'd do if I was open to it. She also said she'd sent my name to a colleague of hers who was looking for someone to consult on the financial side of a major acquisition. She'd told him I was the smartest person she knew in this space. I sat with that for a minute. Then I texted back, I'd like that. Both things. She sent back a single line. I'm sorry it took me this long to ask. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. There was no single moment that reset everything between us. We're still who we are. She's still loud and certain and takes up a lot of room. And I'm still the one who sits near Uncle Bart and lets things unfold. But something shifted. Something that had been sitting at a strange angle for years finally moved into a position that felt more like honesty. Dad called me the following Sunday. He does that. Sunday afternoon calls, 10 or 15 minutes, just to check in. He asked how I was, and I said good, and he said he'd had a nice birthday. Then he said, I'm proud of you. I just want you to know that. I said, I know, Dad. He said, I mean for the work. But I also mean for the other thing. For being the kind of person who doesn't need to say everything. I didn't answer right away. Outside my apartment window, Seattle was doing what Seattle does in October. Gray and close and quietly beautiful. Thanks, Dad, I said. He said, see you at Christmas? See you at Christmas. See you at Christmas. There's a version of that night I used to imagine when I was younger. The version where I finally said something. Where I laid it all out calmly and watched her face change. I rehearsed it so many times I could have done it in my sleep. But that's not how it happened. And I think now that the way it actually happened was better. I didn't say a word. Uncle Bart did, and the reason it landed the way it did, the reason the room went so quiet, is because nobody could accuse it of being performance. It wasn't me defending myself. It was just the truth, walking in through a side door that nobody saw coming. That's the thing about integrity. It doesn't need to announce itself. I spent years building something real. making calls under pressure, earning the trust of people who had every reason to be skeptical. None of that happened because I wanted to prove something to Cordelia. It happened because I cared about doing the work well. The work was real long before she knew about it, and it would have stayed real even if she never found out. I think about that sometimes. The version of events where Uncle Bart never picked up that magazine. Where the dinner ended and I flew back to Seattle and nothing changed. Would that have been worse? I'm honestly not sure. The validation felt good. But the work felt good before the validation. That's the part I want to remember. What I didn't expect was how much Cordelia's apology would cost her. I know her. I know what it takes for her to say I was wrong. She's been building the armor of certainty her whole life. The same way I was building something quieter. When she said it, she meant it, and that took something real. I've been underestimating her capacity for that, the same way she'd been underestimating mine. There's a kind of discipline in staying quiet when you could speak. Not the passive kind, not silence is defeat, but the active kind, where you choose to let the work carry the argument instead of your words. I've had to practice that discipline for years, in rooms full of people who doubted that someone my age, my background, could manage what I was managing. You don't survive that by getting louder. You survive it by getting sharper. By doing the thing so well that eventually the room can't ignore it. And the character part, the part I'm still working on, is doing all of that without letting the resentment calcify. I could have. There were years where I was angry at Cordelia in ways I didn't fully admit to myself. Carrying that anger quietly isn't the same as releasing it. What shifted, sitting next to her on my parents' couch, was that I finally said the real thing out loud. I was protecting myself from your judgment, not to wound her, just because it was true. And the truth, said plainly, without cruelty, is almost always the thing that actually moves something. Dad called me the next Sunday the way he always does. He said he was proud of me. I think I'm starting to believe him.